Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2026 gubernatorial elections for the first time ever on this channel. I figured since we did the 2025 gubernatorial elections just a few days ago, now would be a great time to start turning our eyes towards 2026 and looking ahead to these races. So, midterm governor cycles, we have 36 elections, so we don't have much time to waste. Let's get started with our safe Democratic states. These are going to kind of be like the usual suspects. There's a couple states that we're going to talk about, but I think Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut are going to start out this list in the Northeast. Obviously, some of these other states we'll get back to. Connecticut and Rhode Island have had closer gubernatorial elections in the past, but Democratic governance has been more popular here in recent years. Maryland as well. And then going over to the Midwest, I think Illinois is probably borderline safe, just given that this is a Republican midterm. If if the roles were reversed, if Kamala Harris were president right now, I think it could be different. But seeing as this is potentially going to be a bluer environment in 2022, where Democrats still won by 13%, likely to be in the safe column or close to it. Then finally, we're going to do Hawaii and California. Again, I don't think any of these are too controversial, but that's just where we are right now. Now, Republicans, starting out in Vermont, I'm going to put this one in the safe category. This is obviously dependent on the assumption that Phil Scott is running for re-election. And what's interesting here is that Phil Scott is very popular, but he has yet to say if he will run. He usually announces later, so I'm assuming he's going to run for what I think would be his 7th term. Either way, for now, not going to say too much about Vermont. The next states we're going to look at are going to be the states of Ohio, Tennessee, Alabama, and South Carolina, as well as Arkansas, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, and Nebraska. So most of these states aren't too interesting. Obviously, there's a few retirements like Ohio should not be safe. In like Wyoming, as well as some of these states in the deep south, but they're going to be pretty solid. And then Florida will be interesting. I'm going to put in the likely column just out of an abundance of caution, not because I think this race has really any potential to become competitive, but just because you don't know who the GOP nominee is going to be. So those are our likely or our safe Republican states plus one likely. Why don't we get into the other likely Republican states since we've touched on Florida? I think first up is going to be New Hampshire. This one's pretty clear to me at this point. Obviously, the incumbent governor is Kelly Ayotte, who won her first election in 2024 with, as you can see, around 54% of the vote. She won by about 10% in an open election against, I believe, Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig. And so this state shouldn't be too competitive. Kelly Ayotte ran a good campaign last time. She actually won by a bit more than anticipated. And governors in small states like New Hampshire tend to be popular. I don't see why she would lose re-election unless there's like a huge scandal or a massive blue wave that just takes her out via nationalization. So what's next on the docket? I think the next states should be Iowa and Texas. Again, I don't think either of these states are that competitive, but in Iowa, there is a Republican incumbent who's retiring, Kim Reynolds. She announced she would not run for a second term. She has become quietly one of the most unpopular governors in America. I don't quite know why that is, but she consistently polls very poorly for a Republican in a state that's quite red, such as Iowa. I don't think Democrats have a real shot here, but they do have a decent candidate if Rob Sand decides to run, and Republicans might not know who they're going to go with. Either way, I'd be shocked if this race is less than like a 7 or 8% victory. Although Iowa does like to swing a lot, we've seen pretty significant changes in the electorate here in recent years, so it's always good to exert caution. Texas is, I would say, a different case. I don't think it's as red of a state as Iowa is. There's Democrats a lot more upside here, but in general, Democrats haven't really come close to winning a statewide race in Texas since 2020, and close, that was still a 6% nearly loss for Joe Biden. So it could be a Democratic leaning midterm, but I don't feel comfortable putting Texas anywhere other than likely Republican. And then the final state that's going to go into the likely Republican column might be, to your surprise, the state of Kansas. Now, Kansas, I think you could make the argument for lean, and I'm very close to putting it there. My issue, though, is that Democrats have had very, special circumstances in the past two gubernatorial elections. In 2018, Laura Kelly won over Chris Kobach, but she did that while getting less than 50% of the vote, and Kobach was obviously a very controversial Republican candidate. He basically lost this race on his own. And then in 2022, Kelly ran for re-election, but she had very good approval ratings, and Republicans ran a pretty lackluster campaign, even though I thought they ran a fine candidate. I'm going to put this in the lower end of likely because obviously Democrats have an incumbent lieutenant governor. There's a bit of a bench here for the party, and Republicans haven't been doing too well in Kansas as of late. They've been doing well enough to win it, obviously, but they haven't been like knocking it out of the park the way they have in like neighboring or close by Texas or, close by Missouri and Iowa locally. So it's something to keep an eye on, but for now I'm going to put it in the likely Republican column, even though the Democrats have no incumbent here. So what are we looking at now? As you can see, we have many retirements, but we're going to get started with our likely Democratic states. I think the first one here is going to be Pennsylvania. Now, this is normally a state that's not in the likely category for either party, but if you go back to the 2022 election, Josh Shapiro won by 15% or close to it. Now, obviously, there were a few things that made this easier for him than it really could have been. First and foremost, Doug Mastriano was the Republican candidate, and he was a very, very unelectable candidate. This is reflected if you compare this to the Senate race, where despite Republicans also having a pretty, I would say, bad candidate there in Dr. Oz, and when I say bad in these circumstances, I mean by electability, Dr. Oz still lost that race by 5%, which is quite, unimpressive. Mastriano did him one better by losing by 15. Now, Shapiro obviously is more moderate. He has been winning statewide elections in Pennsylvania dating back to 2016. He was, prior to his win in 2022, considered to be the strongest Democrat for this race. So there are a lot of reasons to, be like very bullish on his electability, but this race was made easier by the fact that Republicans gave up on Mastriano, who turned out to be a very bad candidate. So obviously they don't really have a bench here. They might run Stacey Garrity, who's the treasurer, who could make this a race, but Shapiro's consistently seeing approval ratings in the 60s, so I don't see why he would lose. Incumbent governors rarely lose, and I think Shapiro is interesting in the sense that even though he's from a swing state that is obviously heavily nationalized in almost every election, he still maintains popularity. I think that we're going to go next to Minnesota from here. Tim Walz seems poised to run for re-election, and I would assume he wins. Not much to say here. Oregon, Tina Kotek is the Democrat. She won by only 4% in 2022, but that was with an independent, Betsy Johnson, who likely took away a bit more votes from the Democrats than the Republicans. Without that factor, with the incumbency factor, I think this should be a bigger win for Democrats in Oregon than was 2022. And then finally, the last states we're going to put into this column are Colorado and New Mexico. I don't think either of these are going to be like too, back and forth. Democrats don't have an incumbent in either of these states. Colorado, it's likely that Michael Bennet is going to be the nominee. He is obviously the senator, and I don't quite frankly know why he's running for governor instead of saying in the Senate, but we'll see how that goes. And then what's interesting is that the Attorney General of the state, Phil Weiser, is also running, and this could be a competitive primary, but either way, I don't think the Democrats would lose this race. New Mexico is interesting to me. Democrats are likely to run Deb Haaland, who is a congresswoman from the northern part of the state, and again, Republicans don't really have like a ton of like a bent, like they don't really have like a lot of options here. It looks like there's one mayor of a mid-sized city. Let's see the population of this city. Yeah, around 100,000. So not bad, but certainly nothing game-changing in a state that's as blue as New Mexico. So I think for that, I'm comfortable putting it in the likely column. Now, let's get into our competitive races here. I think Republicans, they have good chances in Ohio and Nevada. These are the first ones I'm going to put in the lean Republican column. Ohio, Mike DeWine's retiring. Republicans have, seem to be poised to nominate Vivek Ramaswamy. Dave Yost, I think, would be a strong candidate. Yost is the Attorney General, but I think Ramaswamy, just despite the fact he's not a statewide official, is more name rec, especially among primary voters. He would not be a very strong candidate. I think he would, kind of motivate Democrats to turn out against him, and he also has seen pretty bad polling. Coupled with the fact that Sherrod Brown may or may not be running for the Democrats, I'm going to put this in lean out of an abundance of caution. I don't think Brown would beat Ramaswamy, but it would certainly be closer. But I could see this moving back to likely before Election Day. Now, let's go over to Nevada, where Republicans have found themselves quite a strong incumbent here in Joe Lombardo. Joe Lombardo has seen pretty good approval ratings. He won in 2022 narrowly over Steve Sisolak, who is actually going to run again, most likely. Now, what's interesting is that Aaron Ford, who is the Attorney General of Nevada, is running. I don't think that he should run in this race because I believe Lombardo is just kind of too popular to beat right now. Like I said, in Pennsylvania, incumbent governors, even if they find a strong opponent, rarely lose. We saw this in 2022 in Kansas, where I thought Derek Schmidt, who is a statewide official for Republicans, Even though he didn't run that good of a campaign, he probably should have won just based on fundamentals alone. He still lost because most people don't like to vote against their incumbent governors unless they hate them. And in Nevada, we don't really see any indication that people are done with Joe Lombardo, even if Democrats run a strong candidate. So those are my thoughts on those states. Let's go to lean Democratic states. I only see a couple at this point. I'm going to put New York and Maine in that column. We're going to just stick with that. And then we're going to talk about Alaska because I think Alaska is special before we return to the, kind of the toss-up-y races. So New York and Maine are pretty simple to me. These are both states where Democrats are kind of going to underperform expectations. The Democratic Party does that actually not really have that great of a mention. Maine. They're lucky that Shenna Bellows, who is the former Secretary of State, is running. But beyond that, they're very lucky she ran in this race. Republicans don't really have a great opponent, but Maine is weird. I'm going to put it in lean out of an abundance of caution. But I think Democrats could be kind of, poised to underperform a little bit there. New York is interesting, though. This is a state where Democrats have a lot of things to think about. So Kathy Hochul is likely to run for re-election. I think she's already declared it, as you can see. Now, what's interesting is that Richie Torres, who is a congressman from New York City, kind of more of a moderate Democrat, might primary her. On top of that, we might see Hochul's own lieutenant governor, Antonio Delgado, who's from the middle kind of upstate region, I'll show you, it's kind of around right here from this central part of the state. He might also run. I think that would be a very competitive primary. I think Hochul could actually lose that primary because she's not very popular in New York, even among Democrats. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is that Mike Lawler, who is the Republican congressman from, kind of the Hudson Valley, North Westchester region, more moderate, has done well in his elections in this district. He might run too, and I think that could make for an interesting race. For now, I think Democrats are favored. This is still a blue state. It's still a blue midterm. I think Democrats are going to have an incentive at least to try to work on their problems, especially in New York City. We will see how that goes. That being said, there is a lot of room for things to go badly for the party here, so I'd keep an eye out for New York, which is something crazy to think about. But hey, we're here. Alaska is the last one I want to talk about in the lean column before we get into like the super, competitive races. Now, Alaska is interesting. The Republicans obviously have an incumbent who is not able to run again, and they're likely to run at this point the lieutenant governor, who's Nancy Dahlstrom. I think she'd be a fine candidate. She's a statewide official. I don't know of any scandals of her off the top of my head, but the Democrats might run Mary Peltola. She has actually said she's interested in running for governor, and Peltola, she won 2 statewide House elections. She still has quite good approval ratings. So I think this race could actually be a toss-up if we do get a Peltola nomination for the Democrats, but since he's not guaranteed to run, I'll put it in lean. Very special case here, though, and Alaska turnout is hard to predict. Peltola did very well in the 2022 midterm. She won by 10%. 2 years later, she lost in a presidential year. So I think Alaska is just crazy to predict, so I'm going to put it in lean for now. But let's go over to our toss-up states. We're going to start in Georgia, where I think, even though this is kind of a toss-up, I think it's the easiest. It's a clear toss-up that maybe tilts Republican. Democrats are interesting, are kind of an interesting position because it does not seem as though Lucy McBath is going to run. She has expressed interest, but it seems as though she might not end up running. I think she'd be the strongest candidate. So it looks like they might run either Keisha Lance Bottoms or Stacey Abrams. I think Keisha Lance Bottoms could be an interesting candidate, but she has no statewide experience. She has also not won a competitive election before, whereas Stacey Abrams has run for governor twice and lost in 2022 fairly decisively. The Republicans, again, they have a fine bench here. I think they're favored to win this race, but if the campaign gets better for Democrats, if they convince McBath to run, if Ossoff ends up winning the Senate race or is expected to win the Senate race by more than anticipated, especially if Brian Kemp does not run, it could tilt in the Democratic Party's favor. Now, let's go over to the Rust Belt. I think both these states are going to be tilt Democrat for now, and they're very close, don't get me wrong. I think Michigan is actually a bit of a problem for Democrats because of this right here. Mike Duggan, who is the independent, running as an independent, is the former mayor of Detroit, who was a Democrat, is now running as independent. I think it's going to take away votes from the Democratic Party, and that could lead the way for John James, who's the likely Republican nominee, to win this election. Now, if we take a look at the Democratic primary, they have good, I think they're going to likely run Jocelyn Benson over Garland Gilchrist. Either would be, I think, a good candidate. I would default to the Democrats narrowly winning this race just because Michigan in midterms has been bluer historically. It's going to be a year that's likely bluer than 2022 when Democrats still won the governorship by 10%. So those things make it hard for Republicans to come back and win, but I think John James is a fine candidate, and Mike Duggan running certainly complicates things. Let's go to Wisconsin now, shall we? This race is going to be fascinating. It's a classic swing state battle. I think Democrats at this point, Tony Evers should run for re-election, but even if he doesn't, it's likely that Josh Kaul, the Attorney General, could run. in his place. Both would be strong candidates, but the Republicans, what's interesting for them is that Tom Tiffany seems primed to run, and he is from the northern district of the state. He's kind of from, let me show you, he's from right here, not Green Bay, think more of the area kind of bordering Lake Superior, I believe that is, or kind of across from Duluth. He would be a strong candidate. The good news for Democrats, Evers is not terribly unpopular. They've done well here in recent midterms. I think they narrowly be favored to win, but the Republicans clearly have a strong bench here, and there's a lot to work with. Now, the last state's going to be Arizona. This is one where I think it's truly, truly so close. I'm going to predict a flip for now, just because the Democrats did not have a great 2024 here. And Katie Hobbs, her approval ratings are kind of, they're okay. They could be better. It kind of varies based on the poll, but I will say this. The Republican Party has a very serious problem with their candidates. Looking at this primary, it's going to be either Karen Taylor Robeson or Andy Biggs, who I both think would actually be subpar. Now, Andy Biggs has kind of been known to take a very, I would say, right-wing positions that could potentially make him unelectable in a state like Arizona, which has seen, even though it did back Trump solidly in 2024, it did have a pretty bad reaction to Kari Lake and Blake Masters in 2022. Karen Taylor Robeson ran against Kari Lake in the GOP primary. I think she'd be a better candidate, but I don't think either of these people are kind of like world beaters in the sense that maybe someone like Mark Brnovich could have been. Either way, though, Katie Hobbs, who's the incumbent Democrat here, is, I would say, kind of fine. She isn't terribly unpopular the way that like Sam Brownback was in Kansas, or the way that I don't know, maybe like yeah, I guess Kathy Hochul could be in New York. Stay tuned on that. But I think that she is certainly below replacement for an incumbent governor of a swing state, right? Like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, quite popular. Brian Kemp in Georgia, quite popular. Joe Lombardo in Nevada, quite popular. Katie Hobbs, a bit more polarizing. So we will see where this race ends up. I think Republicans had a good 2024 in Arizona. That gives me a bit of faith in them. But the environment could shift to the left. That often does happen as presidential terms progress, and this could move in the favor of the Democratic Party. So let me know what you all want to see next. Let me know what you think with this map, and I'll see you all in a few days.